My name's Brett Littler. I'm a Senior Land Service Officer Livestock with the Central Tablelands Local Land Service. I'll be carrying on from Todd Andrews, Beef Development Officer, and going through and looking at muscle scoring. We'll be looking at muscle scoring and we'll be breaking it down into a 5-point scale. An A is the top end, down to an E in the lower end. So in between that is where we're putting our animals and we break them up. And it's an assessment of how much saleable meat yield that we're going to be able to take out of a body. So it's very important when we're looking, just like carrying on from Todd, that we use specific locations when we're making our assessments. And once again, all these locations are consistent across breeds, within breeds and breed types. So we're going to go through and point out these areas now. Here before us we've got 2 steers. It's very important that if we're going to try to muscle assess, that we're able to fat assess. Todd's assessed both these animals as being at the top end of fat score 2, which is 3 millimetres through to about 6 millimetres of fat. So we've got both these animals and Todd's assessed them at 6 mils. And making that assessment for muscularity, we know the fatness of these animals, so once again what we're actually going to be seeing is their level of muscularity. When we're making that assessment, we're really making that assessment looking at the back of the animal, we're looking at the thickness and width of that animal through the stifle area. Okay, so as we're getting behind this animal, we can look from behind. We can see that that animal coming from the hip or the hook bone down through is slightly coming in at the back there. So that's telling me that his widest point is up high up at the hips. If we look up then into the area that I call the plates, where is the P8 site, we can see that dipping away there and falling away. So when we're looking at this animal, we're seeing that animal is starting to get a triangular type appearance, that he's coming from the top, his widest point, down low, and it narrowing as he goes down. Okay, so we can see this animal when we're looking at him, he just doesn't have that thickness there. If we look along the top line of this animal, we can also see that that animal has got a degree of sharpness up through that back line and narrows down through into the front forequarter, not having that width and thickness throughout. Conversely, when we look at this other littler black steer there from behind, we can see that his widest point is actually down low. He's showing a lot more thickness through that back hindquarter. In actual fact, he's starting to take on appearance of being rounded when we look at him from behind. So we're seeing that widest point is down lower in that stifle, and he's coming out and away from that hip or the hook and down through. You can also see, looking at these 2 animals and looking on the back rump, that he tends to come out and around a lot more. So that's displaying a lot more muscularity. When we look along his back line, you can really see from that hip or the hook through, up along his back line that he carries that meat all the way along the back line there. In actual factness, we can start to see him almost start to butterfly in that top line there. So we're seeing a larger amount of muscling there in that animal in comparison to that bloke. So if we're looking at this bloke and making an assessment of muscularity, and you can see that thickness and width down low there at the moment, we would put that animal in a B category. In comparison to this animal over here, that doesn't have that thickness or width or muscularity, we would put him in a C category. If we were going to use a 15-point scale, and that's when we start to widen it out, where we're looking at an A+, which is what I tend to say for my animals that have got the double muscle gene, all the way down to an E-, which is an animal that you'll see really falls away and it's got no thickness and no real volume in that animal as far as muscling is concerned. We would look at these animals, and you can see that this animal, because the degree of muscularity he's got along that back line is a bit lacking, and also how he falls away here at the back, that we'd put him in a C- category. Conversely, this black steer here, the shorter, smaller black steer there, we can see that he's got a lot more thickness and width through that back end, carries that meat right along that top line, and hence I'd be giving him a B+ when we're doing those scores. Of interest from before, we've just brought another animal in here to do some assessments on, and in comparison we talked about just before animals with the double muscle gene or the myostatin gene. This heifer here is a heifer that's definitely got a copy of the myostatin gene. We can see this animal, if we're making our assessments, first looking at the overall fatness, we're seeing no fat displayed on this animal, no filling around the tail head, nothing in the flank, nothing in the twist, the underline or through into that brisket. We're not seeing any fat displayed there. So what we're actually seeing here is a heifer that's on the lower end of fat score, would probably only have 2 to 3 millimetres of fat on the P8 site. So what we're seeing is pure muscle. And we can see this animal, we can see the jump muscle being displayed on the top line there. We can also see a huge amount of convexity around the side there and a huge amount of muscling when we look at her from behind. You can really see when we get behind this heifer here that her widest point is really down low and she's starting to take on an apple type appearance from when viewed from behind. So this heifer here I would give an A muscle score to.